it's difficult living in a country and trying to have hope for it and hope for the better things to come, but you're a woman and disabled and poor and also queer in the queer community. I'm pansexual. So I feel like I'm being picked apart on all fronts.
You've got the Trump administration now gearing up to cut support for hundreds of thousands of disabled Americans for the crime of living with their own families. Because you see, the program in question here is Supplemental Security Income, SSI. It supports about 7.5 million Americans who can't earn a living because of severe disabilities or destitution in old age. These are people who in many cases literally cannot work. SSI is like what stands between them and just complete poverty. And according to ProPublica, multiple officials, internal emails, and a federal regulatory listing, the administration is preparing to cut benefits for some of the lowest income SSI recipients by up to a third. In some cases, it'll end their support entirely. And ProPublica's analysis estimates that the number of people impacted is going to be close to 400,000. And as far as how exactly they're cutting, the proposed rule change deducts the value of a disabled adult's bedroom from their SSI allotment. So they're treating the bedroom that you sleep in at your family's home as effectively a benefit that you're receiving from your family, and thus reducing your federal disability support to match. And then the paperwork to even maintain the reduced benefits, it's huge. According to ProPublica, disabled adults or extremely elderly recipients will have to file extensive monthly reports, including whether the property is leased or owned, the names of anyone who lives with them, whether any of those people have new income or assets, documentation of all household bills and expenses, how much they do or don't personally contribute to those bills, bank statements, and any pay stubs. Right, and then in-person meetings will be required anytime a caregiver's wages or hours change, anytime bills get split differently, or anytime someone tries to help cover an expense. So, if your sister moves in temporarily, if your dad picks up an extra shift, if a relative pays a utility bill, this disabled person has to file paperwork or lose benefits. And again, all of that just to keep their benefits at a reduced level. With all this, I think it's important to remember the real people it's impacting. Because this isn't some hypothetical or abstract thing. These are people like a young couple struggling to support not just their kids, but also a parent with Alzheimer's. You have a woman whose 18-year-old son with Down syndrome lives at home while he tries to become a chef. Or, people like Shatira Burton, who was diagnosed with a whole list of developmental and intellectual disabilities that left her with an IQ below 70. And despite her graduating high school and even taking classes at a community college, she wasn't able to get hired anywhere. So she lives with her dad and uses her monthly $994 SSI check to help pay the bills. But if and when this new policy takes effect, her SSI check could be cut by $330 a month. And these cuts, they're going to be felt even more so by families who are already on programs like SNAP. Because long-standing federal policy held that if a family already qualified for assistance like SNAP, then they were officially deemed financially unable to support a disabled loved one. And the thinking here was pretty straightforward. If your family is poor enough to need food assistance themselves, they can't be supporting you. So your SSI check stays the full amount so you can support yourself. But that rule, it changed under Trump. And so now it doesn't matter if the family's already on SNAP, already on Medicaid, already on the edge of poverty themselves. Anyone living at home after they turn 18 without paying full rent will be treated as if they have a benefactor. And again, the value of their bedroom plus any income and assets that their family has gets calculated and recalculated and deducted from their SSI check. And so that poor family that takes in a disabled adult child, they get penalized. A family that's already getting food assistance because they can't afford groceries themselves now sees their disabled family member's income reduced because the federal government's decided that the family must be a benefactor. It ends up punishing the families that are doing the most for their disabled relatives, the one who can't afford private care, the ones who keep their loved ones out of institutions, the ones that are picking up the slack for a system that already underserves disabled Americans. And what's crazy is that this isn't surprising. This isn't even the first time that this Trump administration has gone after disability programs, right? Rather than fixing the actual inefficiencies in SSI, DOJ and the White House pushed out about 7,000 Social Security employees. And that includes people who were specifically working on SSI reforms and clearing backlogs. And then they undid the Biden administration's improvements to the program's efficiency. This latest cut, it follows the lead of conservative think tanks that have argued that paying low-income SSI recipients less, it could save the federal government $20 billion over the next decade. And so just to do some math for you here, $20 billion in projected savings over 10 years paid for by cutting checks to 400,000 of the most disabled people in America, that is being proposed. That will happen. Meanwhile, the Iran war cost over $11 billion in just the first 6 days alone. Trump's big, beautiful bill, it's delivering $50,000 plus a year in tax savings for the top 1% in the country. The moves and the math just don't fucking make sense. But with all that said, right, as far as where things stand now, you have ProPublica reporting that the rule change is being reviewed by the White House Office of Management and Budget. Right, so there is still editing happening. We're going to have to see what happens there. But then after that, it goes back to the Social Security Administration for publication, which would then trigger a public comment period. And depending on how much opposition that rule faces, it could be maybe next year before this is actually implemented. And as far as the OMB, you had its communications director calling ProPublica's reporting, quote, false because it speculates about policies that have not yet been decided, with him then going a step further and calling the story, quote, trash. But again, like with all things Trump and his administration, words are words, actions are actions, and so this is something we're going to have to keep our eyes on and see how it plays out. Especially because with this one, there is a time when people who oppose it can put their objections on the federal record.
I have nothing. When I say that this is a form of murder, I'm not being hyperbolic. And I can't move out because I can't afford to live on my own. And he's cut SNAP, or barely gives enough to live off of anyways. And even low income places, a lot of apartments still expect you to make at least 2 times what they're asking. And most places, the rent is like $117? Or not $117. $1,700 is what I meant to say. I don't get $1,700. I get $1,114. That's it. Even with low income, how much is that going to leave me with to be able to pay? How many utilities are included? What do I still have to pay for? And then I have to pay my phone. And then I've had to purchase my own prescriptions now. Now, luckily, because there's a program with my insurance, so I don't pay full price. I pay a grand total of $10 for 3 meds every time I refill. So, it could be a lot worse, but when you don't have anything, this is what you voted for. And I don't want to hear that this isn't what you voted for, because it absolutely is. Because it was common knowledge about the big, beautiful bill even before. My cousin wants me to find my own place. But how? How is that even feasible? Especially when we're not building enough low-income residencies. So there are years-long lists to wait on in order to even get an application, to even I had a house. It was a mobile home, but it was mine. With my mom. if it weren't for my cousin, I'd be fucked. Because my dad doesn't seem to understand that being a parent is for life. And when you're a parent of a disabled child, that's even more so. So he was no help. And I'm on my own. And I live in a country. I live in a world that doesn't give two shits. Every day I wake up in this country is so hateful. And I'm supposed to take myself and people like me are supposed to take the high road. When you're removing things that are making our lives possible. I'm so fucking angry.